My name is Evelyn Parker. For most of my life, I was the afterthought. While my sister Brielle sparkled in the center of our family's attention, I hovered quietly in the background, overlooked but always observing. We grew up in Fairhaven, a suburb known for its gated estates and manicured lawns. Our home, the Parker Manor, was a grand colonial house perched on a hill, symbolizing generations of wealth built through Parker developments, our family's real estate empire. Our parents, Charles and Margot Parker, were respected figures in the community. Their photos were always in the society pages, attending galas, shaking hands with mayors, donating to museums. And when Brielle was born, the entire estate seemed to orbit around her. Even her cries as a baby were met with indulgent smiles. When I came 2 years later, there were no fireworks. Just a quiet nod to balance the family. Growing up, it was always Brielle's name that echoed through the halls. Brielle got the best tutors. Brielle got a horse. Brielle's bedroom overlooked the gardens. Me. I got practicality. Hand-me-downs, lessons in logic, and a room facing the servants' driveway. They said I was the serious one, but I was just trying to be seen. In school, I found comfort in numbers and code. While Brielle mastered ballet and charm, I buried myself in computer science and robotics. By high school, I had won state-level competitions, published small research, and earned a spot at Stanford. Brielle, meanwhile, was crowned Debutante of the Year and got into Wharton with a letter of recommendation from one of our father's business partners. When I told my parents I wanted to study AI and tech infrastructure, they barely blinked. "That's not really the Parker way," Dad said. "You should consider business like your sister. Something transferable." When I explained how AI would soon transform industries including real estate, they nodded politely, then asked Brielle about her next dress fitting. The real sting came the day of my graduation from Stanford. I gave the valedictorian speech. My parents didn't come. They sent flowers. Brielle had a polo match. So I walked the stage alone, holding my diploma with trembling fingers, while texting my landlord about late rent. My scholarship had covered tuition but not life. I eventually moved to Portland, built my career from the ground up, and became one of the lead developers at a major tech startup. No help, no inheritance. Just long nights, server rooms, and caffeine. 3 years passed without a single visit or invitation home. I figured I'd finally accepted it. I was not the heir. I was the outsider. Then one snowy Thursday morning, as I was debugging a back-end protocol, my phone rang. It was a Boston area code. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. "Miss Parker." The voice was formal, measured. "This is Edwin Hargrove, your family's attorney. I'm calling regarding your parents. There's been an accident." Everything around me seemed to freeze. Time, noise, thoughts. He continued, words spilling into static. "Fatal crash. Icy road. Immediate. Both gone." I stood there in silence, a million emotions warring inside me. Guilt, grief, emptiness, but mostly confusion. And then came the words that shifted everything. "I understand the relationship was distant," Hargrove said gently. "But the reading of the will is scheduled for Monday morning. You'll want to be there. It concerns you directly." "Concerns me? How?" Hadn't they signed everything over to Brielle years ago? Hadn't they made that crystal clear? I almost didn't go. Almost. But something in his tone, something uneasy, made me book that ticket back to Fairhaven. For the first time in years, I was walking back into the house that never felt like mine. And I had no idea what was waiting for me. When I arrived in Fairhaven, the sky was overcast and gray, casting the Parker estate in a somber light. The iron gates creaked open at my arrival, and for a moment, I hesitated before driving up the long gravel path that led to the house I had once called home. I hadn't set foot here in over 3 years. Not since the last bitter argument with my father when he told me Brielle would be the one to carry the family legacy forward. Now both he and my mother were gone, and somehow I was expected at the reading of their will. Aunt Delia greeted me at the door with an awkward half-hug. "You look well, Evelyn," she said, her voice tight. "Brielle's in the sunroom. She's handling arrangements." Course she was. The house was exactly as I remembered it. The velvet curtains, the scent of polished wood, the hush of inherited silence. Portraits of our ancestors lined the walls, every face stern, powerful, sure of its place. And Brielle's graduation photo from Wharton hung right in the center of the foyer, larger than life. I stepped into the sunroom. Brielle turned, still wrapped in a black designer shawl, her blonde curls pinned neatly, makeup flawless despite the tears she probably hadn't shed. "Evelyn," she said smoothly, her voice coated in civility. "You came." "They were still my parents," I replied quietly. Her eyes didn't flinch, but I caught the faint twitch of her mouth. "I wasn't sure you'd bother." Chose not to engage. Not yet. We sat in silence for a few moments, the kind of silence that feels like 100 conversations never had. I looked around and noticed something strange. The room was filled with condolence bouquets, but one letter on the coffee table caught my attention. It was addressed to me. My name in my father's handwriting. I reached for it, but Brielle's hand moved fast. "That's private," she said coolly. "It has my name on it." "Still," she said, folding it and slipping it into her purse. "We can discuss this after the reading." There it was again, that quiet control, that air of ownership she had carried since childhood. The house, the business, even the grief. The funeral was a blur of black coats and whispered condolences. Everyone was there, the mayor, business partners, old family friends. Most offered platitudes, their eyes sliding away when I said I'd moved into tech. "Oh," they'd say, unsure what to do with that. Brielle was the one they gravitated toward, as always. But it was the lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, who watched me closely from across the reception. When the time came, he gently touched my shoulder and said, "Tomorrow, 9 a.m. my office." "Am I really part of this?" I asked. "You are," he said simply. "Your father made sure of it." The next morning, I arrived at Hargrove and Associates. The building was sleek and gray, more modern than I remembered. I was shown into a private meeting room with long windows and leather chairs. Brielle was already there, dressed in quiet designer power, legs crossed, calm as ever. She didn't look at me. Mr. Hargrove entered with a sealed file. "Thank you both for coming," he began, setting the document on the table. "Before we proceed with the full reading, there's something I need to share with you, Evelyn." Brielle's posture tensed. "Your father amended the trust 3 weeks before his passing," Hargrove said. "He asked that I share this letter with you before we begin." He handed me a thick envelope. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling. "Dear Evelyn, if you're reading this, I am gone. And there's much I never said that I should have. I was wrong, Evelyn. Wrong to ignore your achievements. Wrong to assume your path was somehow less valid. I see now that you built something extraordinary. Without our name, without our help. That takes strength. Real strength. I should have told you how proud I was. I'm telling you now. And more than that, I'm leaving you something I once believed belonged only to your sister." I looked up, heart pounding. Brielle's voice cut in. "What is that supposed to mean?" Mr. Hargrove didn't flinch. "He's referring to the original Parker Trust. The one tied to the company's leadership." "You're joking," she said, eyes narrowing. "Not at all," he said. "According to the stipulations set by Jonathan Parker, your grandfather, the company's successor is to be determined based on merit. Specifically, integrity, innovation, and leadership. Your father conducted a formal evaluation. Evelyn has been named as the heir." Silence. Pure slicing silence. Brielle's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes flickered from me to the lawyer and back. "No," she said. "No, she's been gone for years. She doesn't know anything about the company." "Your father disagreed," Hargrove said. He believed Evelyn's accomplishments in tech, her independent success, and her commitment to ethical practices embodied the values Jonathan Parker built this company on. "This is absurd," Brielle snapped. I've spent the last 10 years preparing for this role. She ran off to play with computers. This is my inheritance. I looked at her, but this time I didn't flinch. Maybe it was never about inheritance, I said softly. Maybe it was about legacy. Her stare turned venomous. But I saw it now. The fear. The cracks beneath the perfect exterior. She had controlled everything until now. And suddenly the balance was shifting. The silence in the lawyer's office was heavy, almost unreal. Brielle sat rigid in her chair, her knuckles white where she gripped the armrest. I could feel the heat of her glare, but for once, it didn't cut me the way it used to. Something had shifted. And maybe for the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking in her shadow. Mr. Hargrove cleared his throat and unfolded the document from its envelope with slow, deliberate movements. Every eye in the room was on him, but his voice remained calm. This is the official amendment to the Parker Family Trust, signed by your father, Charles Edwin Parker, 3 weeks before the incident. It was witnessed and notarized, and medical evaluations confirmed full mental capacity at the time of signing. He paused to look at both of us. Your father was very precise with his language, he said, turning the page. And it's important that I read his full declaration for the record. I braced myself. Part of me still couldn't believe I was here, listening to my father's words from beyond the grave. The man who had once told me I was too rigid, too focused, too distant to ever belong in the world of business. But now his voice, at least through Hargrove, was clear, final, and suddenly mine. To my daughters, Brielle Marie Parker and Evelyn Grace Parker, Hargrove began, I leave the following instructions. It has long been assumed that leadership of Parker Developments would pass to Brielle. However, after much reflection and personal evaluation, I have come to understand that assumption was flawed. He looked up just briefly. Brielle's lips parted in a soundless protest. While Brielle has been groomed for the role, it has become apparent that the qualities my father, Jonathan Parker, deemed essential to lead this company, namely integrity, innovation, and commitment to ethical stewardship, are embodied most clearly by Evelyn. He turned the page. Therefore, effective upon my death, I name Evelyn Grace Parker the rightful heir to the controlling interest in Parker Developments, in accordance with the founding charter. She shall assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, with full voting rights and authority. The silence snapped like a branch beneath pressure. Brielle surged to her feet, her voice rising with practiced outrage. This is insane. He wasn't well. He must have been confused. Manipulated. There is no evidence of diminished capacity, Hargrove said flatly. Your father's medical team has confirmed he was of sound mind. Additionally, he requested that this process be documented thoroughly. He reached into a leather folder and pulled out a small black tablet. He also recorded a video. He instructed me to play it in the event that his decision was contested. My breath caught. Play it, Brielle demanded, folding her arms. Hargrove tapped the screen. The tablet illuminated with the image of my father, older, wearier than I remembered, but clear-eyed and sharp. He wore his usual navy suit, seated in his study with the old globe behind him and one of our family portraits on the desk. If you're watching this, he began, it means there is disagreement about my final wishes. Let me be absolutely clear. I am of sound mind and body. I have made these decisions based on objective evaluation, not sentiment, not habit, and certainly not tradition. He leaned forward slightly. To Brielle, I know this comes as a shock. You've always expected to lead the company, and that was our fault. Your mother and I encouraged that narrative. But we failed to truly assess what leadership means. We looked at presentation, not substance. And we ignored the quiet strength standing beside you. He paused. Evelyn, if you're watching, I want you to know something I never said enough. I was proud of you. Not just for your career, your achievements, but for your integrity. For doing what's right, even when it's hard. I see now what I didn't before. You're the person who should lead Parker Developments into the future. And I hope you'll accept that responsibility. The screen went black. I stared at the tablet, heart pounding. felt surreal. Like hearing a confession from someone who had never said the words aloud. He had finally seen me. And said it in front of her. Brielle's expression had crumbled. For the first time in my memory, her mask slipped. Her confidence fractured. "This changes nothing," she snapped, but her voice was less sure now. He was under pressure. He was grieving mother's illness. He was confused. He was lucid, Mr. Hargrove said. And decisive. "We conducted all due diligence. The trust amendment is binding." She fell back into her chair, eyes burning holes into me. "You don't even know the business," she hissed. "You've been gone for years. You think you can walk in and just take over." I didn't respond immediately. Because the truth was, I didn't know yet. Not fully. But what I did know was that I wasn't going to let her rewrite this story. Not again. "I built a tech company from the ground up," I said quietly. "Without your help. Without his name. I've led teams, managed millions, navigated crises. The question isn't whether I know this business. It's whether I have what it takes to learn, adapt, and protect what our grandfather built." And Dad believed I could. Her jaw tightened. "This is a setup. If you wish to contest the will," Hargrove said, "you are within your rights. However, be advised that your father anticipated this. He requested we prepare all supporting documentation, including third-party assessments, to defend the change." She stared at him, furious but calculating. Then, without a word, she stood, grabbed her bag and walked out of the room. The door shut behind her with a soft but definitive click. Mr. Hargrove turned to me. "Are you ready for this, Evelyn?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I think I am." He smiled faintly, as if seeing something settle into place. "Your father made the right choice. You might not have seen it before, but he did. I left the firm that day not as the forgotten daughter, but as the new head of the Parker legacy. But deep down I knew this was just the beginning. Brielle wouldn't give up so easily. Not after years of being the anointed one. And if I was going to survive this inheritance, I'd have to uncover what else had been buried beneath the marble floors of Parker Manor. I returned to the Parker estate that afternoon, no longer as a guest or a reluctant visitor, but as its new owner. The staff had been informed of the changes through the lawyer's office, but their faces still wore the tight expressions of people unsure which direction the wind was blowing. As I walked through the grand hallway, their eyes flicked toward me, then quickly away, uncertain whether to greet me or pretend I was still the outsider. Martha, the longtime housekeeper who had practically raised us both, was the only one who offered more than a nod. "Welcome home, Miss Evelyn," she said softly, and her voice, gently cracked with age and memory, made something in my chest squeeze unexpectedly. "Thank you," I whispered. The house hadn't changed. Not in layout, not in scent. But it felt different under my feet. Heavier. Like I could feel the ghost of my father's judgment still pressing from the walls, while my mother's silken expectations hovered in the air. I passed the dining room, where so many family dinners had ended in silence. The music room, where Brielle's violin concerts had drawn applause. The sitting room, where I'd once been told to lower my voice when I asked to attend a tech conference instead of a cotillion gala. And then I came to my father's study. The door was slightly ajar. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting sharp beams across the polished mahogany desk. The room smelled of leather, old paper, and something faintly citrus. His favorite wood polish. I hesitated for a moment, hand on the knob before stepping inside. This was where it had all happened. The decisions. The letters. Change of heart. My eyes scanned the space. Nothing looked out of place. The bookshelves were lined with first editions, real estate manuals, and business histories. The decanter on the sideboard still held the whiskey he favored. His chair was slightly turned toward the fireplace, like he had just stepped out of the room. I approached the desk slowly, fingers tracing the wood. There were papers neatly stacked, and a leather-bound notebook sat off to the side. But what caught my eye was the drawer beneath the right armrest. Always locked, always off limits. Till now. I crouched and pulled gently. It didn't budge. Course. Then, without thinking, I reached into the inside pocket of the blazer I'd retrieved from the coatroom earlier. My father's blazer. It had been left on a hook behind his chair after the funeral. I'd taken it almost absent-mindedly, unsure why. Now I understood. In the pocket was a small brass key. Slid into the lock with a soft click. The drawer opened with a sigh of wood on wood, and inside was a stack of envelopes, a worn folder marked transition, and something even more startling, another journal. I pulled the items out and set them on the desk. The first envelope had my name on it. Not type. Handwritten. Evelyn, to be read only if you return. I opened it slowly. My dearest Evelyn, if you're reading this, you've come back. That alone gives me hope. I've spent the last year questioning nearly everything I believed about my role as your father. I see now that I chose convenience over courage. Brielle was easier, more agreeable, and I mistook that for readiness. I know I can't undo the harm, but I've tried to make amends the only way I knew how, by telling the truth, not just in the will, but here in this room. In the files and letters I never had the nerve to send. You'll find documents that may surprise you. Deals that Brielle has been managing without proper oversight. Contacts she made without board approval. I began compiling them when I realized how far she had strayed from the company's founding principles. Perhaps too late. But still I tried. I don't expect forgiveness, Evelyn. But I do hope for understanding. You are the one who can protect this company's soul. Please don't let it be gutted for profit. With regret and hope. But I folded the letter carefully, breath catching. He had known. All this time he had known. The next folder was thick. Inside were copies of contracts, real estate transaction proposals, and correspondences between Brielle and a man named Colin Radley, the CEO of Meridian Holdings. I scanned the documents, my pulse quickening. Brielle had been planning to sell key Parker development assets, some of our most historic properties, at undervalued rates to Meridian. There were handwritten notes in the margins of some printouts. My father had been trying to trace the paper trail. One note read, November 17th. Found invoice discrepancy. Colin is married to Jacob's cousin. Conflict of interest. Check with legal. Jacob, Brielle's husband. Always lurking just behind her, quiet and polished. Suddenly I remembered his smug confidence at the funeral. The way he'd smiled when Brielle greeted mourners as though she already held the throne. I pulled out another folder. Inside was a timeline. My father had mapped it out. Dates of secret meetings. Cash movements. Even internal memos that had never passed through board channels. He had known what she was doing. And he had begun building a case. Beneath it all was a USB drive. I slipped it into the laptop sitting at the corner of the desk. The desktop opened immediately. No password needed. Inside the drive was a folder marked, Contingency. Clicked it. What opened was a full audit report, commissioned 3 months before the crash. It outlined financial irregularities under Brielle's oversight. Inflated vendor contracts. Bonus structures approved without board review. Consulting fees paid to shell companies. And then the most damning file of all, an email draft my father never sent. To the board of directors. I am initiating a formal review of Ms. Brielle Parker's role as executive vice president due to concerns over fiduciary negligence. Supporting documents attached. Pending confirmation. I recommend temporary suspension of her signing authority until further notice. He had been days, maybe hours, from removing her. And now she was still there, still operating under the assumption that she could reverse the will. Contest my appointment. Take it all back. I sat back in the chair and stared at the fireplace. He had tried. He had finally seen me. But the cost of delay had been steep. And now it was up to me to finish what he started. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Walter Pierce, the company's chief financial officer. Heard about the will. Call me when you can. We need to talk about Brielle. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wasn't ready for war. But war had already begun. Quietly behind doors, while I was away building my own world. Now that world had collided with the one I left behind. And I was the only one left to hold the truth. The sun had begun to set outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I gathered the documents, slipped the USB back into its case, and stood. There was still so much I didn't know. But one thing was now crystal clear. If Brielle had been planning to dismantle Parker Developments piece by piece, she wouldn't stop just because the will named me CEO. And if she discovered that my father had uncovered her betrayal, she might do worse. The next morning, Boston felt colder than usual. Not just in temperature but in tone. Kind of stillness before something breaks. The city skyline outside the guest bedroom window was gray, stretched beneath a low fog that made everything look distant, unreachable. I stood in the kitchen of the estate, staring into a cup of untouched coffee. Martha moved quietly in the background, preparing toast, the familiar rhythm of her presence oddly comforting. She had been there through it all. Birthday parties where only Brielle got gifts that sparkled, holidays where I was always seated next to the help, and all those nights when my father dismissed my ideas as theoretical nonsense. And yet here I was. The theoretical nonsense had turned into market-changing tech solutions, a 7-figure stake in my startup, and now, control of Parker Developments. But what I had inherited wasn't a company. Not yet. It was a web. A legacy buried under secrets, politics, and polished lies. At exactly 9 a.m., I stepped into the boardroom at the Parker Tower, the company's glass and steel headquarters in downtown Boston. The reception staff stood straighter when I passed, their greetings forced, eyes flickering with uncertainty. I wasn't the Parker daughter they had expected to rise. The boardroom was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a canvas. A long walnut table stretched across the space, with leather chairs arranged neatly. At the far end sat Walter Pierce, the seasoned silver-haired CFO who had been my father's right hand for over a decade. He stood as I entered. "Evelyn," he said, offering a hand. "Thank you for coming on short notice." "Thank you for the message," I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his expression watchful. "I'll be direct," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "The leadership transition has created uncertainty. Brielle's allies on the board are pushing back quietly, questioning the validity of the amendment. Some think you're not prepared. Others think you're a threat." I sat back, measuring his words. "And what do you think?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a black folder and slid a document across the table. "This is an internal memo Brielle approved 2 weeks ago. It authorizes exploratory talks with Meridian Holdings to liquidate several waterfront properties below market value." I scanned the document. "Meridian again. I've seen some of this already," I said. "My father kept records." He was preparing to intervene. Walter nodded. "Yes, he shared some of those concerns with me privately. But before he could act, the accident happened." "Do you think it was an accident?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. Walter's brow furrowed. The roads were icy. They had a dinner reservation near Cape Elizabeth. He lost control. "That's what the report says." He sounded convinced. But something in me didn't fully believe it. Not anymore. Not after reading those letters. Not after seeing just how far Brielle had already gone. "There's more," Walter continued. "Brielle's husband, Jacob, has been quietly routing company funds through a shell consultancy based in Delaware. High fees, low deliverables. I only noticed it last month, but I couldn't raise the issue without full access. And now I have it," I said slowly. "Yes. And you need to act quickly." The room felt tighter suddenly. "What's the board's mood?" I asked. "Fractured. Your father's passing was a blow, but many of them respected him. If you come in with a clear plan, a roadmap forward, and proof of irregularities, they'll support you." I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and slid it across the table. "Everything's on here," I said. "Emails, invoices, a timeline. He compiled it all. Walter accepted it with care, his eyes flicking back to mine. He knew you'd come back. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I agreed. Maybe he had hoped, but believed. Not until the very end. Just then the door opened, and Brielle walked in. Her presence sucked the oxygen from the room. Dressed in a steel-gray pantsuit, hair twisted in a perfect chignon, she looked every inch the corporate heiress. "I wasn't informed of this meeting," she said crisply, dropping her leather folder on the table. "We weren't holding a formal meeting," Walter said. "Evelyn and I were reviewing the transition details." "How convenient," she said, sliding into a chair without waiting for permission. "And how ironic." I turned toward her, keeping my voice calm. "You've had 10 years to prepare for this role. But the company's founding charter doesn't reward preparation. It rewards principles. You think this is about ethics?" She laughed once. "You think your tech company makes you morally superior? Parker Developments isn't a charity, Evelyn. It's an empire, which you've been trying to dismantle behind closed doors," I said. Walter reached into his folder and handed her a printed copy of the audit request. "What's this?" she asked, flipping the pages. "A request to freeze the Meridian deal," he said. "Pending further review." Her eyes narrowed. "You're overstepping." "No," I said. "I'm exercising my authority." "You mean the authority you got by manipulating Dad in his final months?" I stood slowly, pushing back my chair. He came to his decision after realizing he had spent his life investing in a mirage. Your charm, your polish. But behind it all was rot. She shot to her feet. "You've always resented me." "I pitied you," I said. The room crackled with tension. Walter intervened. "We can't resolve this here. The board meets in 2 days. They'll vote on whether to uphold the transition or trigger a full review. I suggest we come prepared." Brielle grabbed her folder and stormed out, slamming the glass door behind her. I stood frozen. This wasn't just a family feud. This was corporate war. And I had just lit the first match. The 2 days before the board vote passed in a haze of tension, caffeine, and urgent whispers in dark corners of the Parker Tower. While Brielle retreated into closed-door meetings with her loyalists, I worked out of my father's former office with Walter Pierce and a small, trusted team of senior managers and auditors. Each file we uncovered tightened the noose. At first, the records hinted at carelessness, misplaced decimal points, oddly routed payments, inflated vendor quotes. But as we dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Shell companies linked to Jacob's extended family. Consulting fees for services that were never rendered. Property assessments undervalued by as much as 30%. Every detail pointed to a deliberate strategy. Strip Parker Developments of its legacy assets and funnel the profits elsewhere. "She wasn't planning to inherit," Walter muttered one night, standing by the tall windows overlooking downtown Boston. "She was planning to exit. With as much money as she could carry." I sat at my father's desk. Documents spread around me like the aftermath of a storm. She thought no one would question her. Because for a decade no one did. Martha stopped by the estate each evening, bringing meals I rarely touched and words I didn't know how much I needed. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said gently, setting down a bowl of soup. "This house hasn't felt honest in a long time." On the second night, she paused by the study door as I scanned a legal contract underlined in my father's handwriting. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. I looked up. 3 weeks before the accident, your father asked me to go into the attic, to bring him an old briefcase. "What was inside?" I asked. "I never saw," she replied. "But he sat in here with it for hours. When I brought in tea later, he looked broken, like something had shifted. I think that's when he decided to change the will." I stood and went straight to the attic. The briefcase was there, tucked under a moth-eaten blanket beside an old rocking horse. Brown leather, brass clasp. Carried it back to the study. Inside was a thick manila envelope labeled Meridian. Proposal draft. And below that, something I never expected. Photos. Brielle and Jacob. Meeting Colin Radley, the CEO of Meridian Holdings. But not in boardrooms or corporate dinners. In luxury villas. On private yachts. Dates that coincided with company offsites. Paid for by Parker Developments. There were receipts. Emails. Hotel confirmations. And then a voice memo. My father's voice. March 12th. If anything happens to me before this is resolved, I want it on record that Cassandra, Brielle, has violated her fiduciary duties. I don't know if she realizes the full scope of what Jacob is doing. Or if she simply doesn't care. I played the recording 3 times, numb. He had seen it all. And now so had I. The morning of the board vote arrived wrapped in gray clouds. Inside the boardroom, tension buzzed like static. 12 members. 6 had known me as a child. 4 had watched Brielle charm donors and clients for years. 2 were corporate appointees, loyal only to results. I took my seat at the far end, wearing a simple navy blazer and flats. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to lead. Brielle walked in moments later. Black sheath dress. Pearl earrings. Her eyes met mine like daggers. Walter stood first. Thank you all for being here. As you're aware, today's session is to finalize succession protocol following the passing of Charles and Margot Parker. The will names Evelyn Parker as successor to the CEO position. However, Ms. Brielle Parker has challenged the amendment and requested an internal vote. He turned to me. Ms. Parker, your presentation. I rose, my heart thudding in my chest. This company was founded on integrity, I began. Not just the appearance of it, but real, verifiable commitment to ethics and innovation. I know some of you have questions. About my experience. About my time away. But today isn't about who smiled at the gala or who knew the donor's favorite wine. It's about who will protect what this company was meant to be. I handed out a packet. You'll find evidence here of unauthorized transactions, misappropriated funds, and undeclared conflicts of interest. All tied to the current executive vice president, Brielle Parker, and her husband, Jacob Langston. I looked each of them in the eye. You'll also find a letter from my father and a voice recording. His last statement regarding his decision. The documents speak for themselves. Brielle shot to her feet. This is a smear campaign, she snapped. She's twisting details to fit her narrative. The money was approved. The contracts were legal. Were they? Walter asked. Because our auditors have traced payments through 3 shell corporations linked to your husband's college roommate. All while you were proposing to sell legacy assets for a fraction of their market value. Murmurs rippled through the room. Brielle's face paled. You're taking her word over mine. We're looking at facts, said one board member, an older man with thick-rimmed glasses. And the facts are damning. Jacob appeared in the doorway, pale and stiff. We need to talk, he said under his breath, gesturing to Brielle. Not now, she hissed. Now, he insisted. They stepped into the hall. I watched through the glass as their silhouettes argued. He held up a document. She slapped it from his hand. He walked away. She returned 10 minutes later, eyes bloodshot but chin lifted. This is far from over, she whispered as she passed me. I didn't reply. The vote was unanimous. The board upheld the will. I was officially confirmed as CEO of Parker Developments. When the board's vote came in, unanimous, final, legally binding, the room seemed to tilt around me. Not physically but emotionally. Like everything that had once pushed me to the margins was now standing still, waiting for my next move. Brielle sat motionless at the far end of the table, her expression unreadable. The woman who had always seemed so composed, so smug in her untouchable place at the center of our family's empire, was now locked in silence. Her pearl earrings caught the light. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. This meeting is adjourned, Walter said, tapping his pen twice against the table. As the board members began to gather their documents and murmur congratulations, I remained seated. Not out of shock or disbelief, But because I knew this was only phase 1, Brielle rose slowly. Her chair scraped slightly against the polished floor. She didn't look at me. Not until she reached the door. "You're going to ruin everything," she said flatly. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Her heels echoed down the hallway and she was gone. Walter lingered behind, closing the door after the others had gone. "You handled that well," he said. "Your father would've." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "No. Your grandfather would have been proud. Your father." He got there in the end. I stood, finally letting my shoulders drop. "What happens now?" "You'll be announced as the new CEO in a press release tomorrow. You'll need to meet with department heads, review active contracts, and decide what to do with the deals Brielle initiated." "And the audit?" I asked. "We're completing it now. There's more coming in. Jacob's involvement runs deeper than we thought." I looked out the window. The streets below were moving, unaware that a legacy was being reshaped 10 stories above them. That afternoon, I walked the halls of Parker Developments for the first time as its leader. Employees offered polite nods, unsure how to behave. Some whispered as I passed. Others smiled with cautious hope. My father's office, now mine, felt larger than I remembered. The windows, the walnut desk, the portrait of Jonathan Parker on the wall. I paused at that portrait. My grandfather's sharp eyes and hard jaw. He had built the company with his own hands, bought the first property with borrowed money, drawn his first blueprint on the back of a diner napkin. He believed in legacy, but more than that, he believed in merit. A knock at the door. "Martha." She held a thick leather-bound journal in her hands. "I found this behind the filing cabinet," she said. "Your father must have hidden it. It's dated through the last few months of his life." I took it carefully, hands trembling. "Thank you." When she left, I sat at the desk and opened to the first page. September 1st. I watched an interview today. Evelyn on CNBC. She spoke about building technology that protects privacy and empowers communities. She looked so confident, so sure of herself. I thought about the time I told her she'd never fit into the business world. How wrong I was. September 19th. Brielle presented the Meridian proposal again. She's pushing hard. Won't answer simple questions. Jacob hovers too close. I'm beginning to suspect she's hiding something. October 10th. Found inconsistencies in quarterly reports. Walter is concerned. Jacob may be laundering money through vendors. Brielle deflects when asked. Starting to record everything. October 23rd. Called Mr. Hargrove. Requested amendment to the will. It's time. October 24th. Told Martha to retrieve the briefcase from the attic. Included the documents, the photos. If anything happens to me, Evelyn needs to know everything. My hands froze on the page. He knew. He saw it. He tried. The last entry stopped me cold. November 5th. Dinner reservations set. Celebrating 35 years with Margot. Roads are expected to ice over. Should reschedule. But she insists we go. I'll leave the documents with Edwin in the morning. If this is the last entry, let it be said clearly. Evelyn is the rightful heir. She is the future of Parker Developments. The rest is noise. Closed the journal. And breathe. The next morning the press release went out. Parker Developments announces new CEO. Evelyn Grace Parker, daughter of the late Charles and Margot Parker, to lead the company into its next chapter. Headlines followed. The forgotten daughter steps in. Tech prodigy inherits empire. From Silicon Valley to legacy real estate, Evelyn Parker takes the helm. But not all coverage was kind. Internal family conflict casts shadow over new leadership. Boardroom betrayal. Parker's sister ousted amid scandal. By noon my phone rang. "We've got a problem," Walter said. Brielle's lawyer just filed a formal challenge to the will. I stood in my office, looking out over the city, heart pounding. On what grounds? She's claiming undue influence. Says your father was manipulated. That he wasn't of sound mind. But we have the medical reports. Doesn't matter, he replied. This is about dragging it out. Damaging your credibility. Slowing you down. How long will it take to resolve? Months. Maybe a year. I turned from the window. The portrait of Jonathan Parker still stared down from the wall. Then we fight. That night I returned to the estate. The old house creaked with the cold wind. Martha had left dinner out, but I wasn't hungry. I went to the study, opened the drawer, pulled out the last file my father had compiled. His personal notes on company culture. Inside was a yellowed document from decades ago. A letter from Jonathan to his son. Charlie, one day you'll need to make a choice. Do you want to protect what we've built? Or watch it become a hollow name? Legacies aren't handed down like cufflinks. They're earned. And the ones who earn them don't always look like heirs. But you'll know them by what they protect, not what they take. I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I turned off the lamp, closed the drawer, and prepared for the long fight ahead. The lawsuit moved faster than expected. 2 weeks after the press release announcing my appointment as CEO, betrayals' legal team filed a formal injunction to block all executive decisions made under my authority. They claimed my father had been emotionally compromised and pressured by isolation, grief, and deteriorating mental health. They submitted selective emails, old voicemail snippets, and speculative affidavits from family friends who claimed to have witnessed signs of confusion. But the one thing they didn't have was the truth. My father's voice recordings, journal entries, video statements, audit documents, and letters proved otherwise. His mind had been sharp, his regret sincere, his decision clear. And I was determined not to let that be twisted in court. In the meantime, the company was in limbo. Some departments operated normally. Others slowed to a crawl, unsure who to follow. betrayals' loyalists in mid-management began to whisper about reclaiming direction. Tension brewed in meetings. Emails arrived late. Project timelines slipped. And I could feel it. Parker Developments was at risk of becoming a battlefield. On a rainy Thursday morning, I sat in the strategy conference room with Walter, the company's legal advisor Megan Cho, and Julian Harris, our new head of compliance, a quiet man with a sharp memory and a deeper archive. We need to clean house, Walter said, placing a red folder in front of me. Inside were 6 names. Each of them signed off on questionable invoices during betrayals' tenure. We can't prove they knew what they were doing, but we can't trust them either. And they're slowing the transition. We don't have the political capital to fire everyone, Megan said carefully. Not while the lawsuit is active. It'll look like retaliation. Then we reassign, Julian offered. Move them sideways. Away from anything sensitive. I tapped my pen. How soon can we do that? Monday, Walter said. Quietly. We'll make it look like restructuring. Good, I replied. Do it. That afternoon I called a company-wide town hall. The first Parker CEO to do so in over 8 years. Hundreds of employees gathered in the atrium. The upper balconies filled. The screens came alive with my face. I stood on the central stage with a single microphone. No slides. No branding. Just me. Most of you don't know me, I began. And those who do probably remember the quiet kid who ate lunch in her father's office reading code instead of real estate reports. But I'm not here to relive the past. A quiet laugh rippled through the room. I'm here because I believe in what this company once stood for. And because I've seen what it can become again. I looked up at the second floor, where several skeptical executives leaned against the railing. Parker Developments wasn't built on privilege. It was built on risk, on innovation, on trust. My grandfather bet everything on one property. My father took that foundation and made it national. And now we have a choice. My voice steadied. We either preserve what's left of that legacy, or we let it be stripped away one asset at a time. Quietly, efficiently, without anyone asking why. I stepped back from the mic. I'm asking why. And then I walked off the stage. It was the first time in weeks I felt the company breathe. That night, I returned to the estate exhausted. Martha met me at the door with a quiet nod. She handed me an envelope, one without a return address. Inside was a single page. Anonymous. You don't know what she's capable of. I stared at it. Nothing else. No signature. No markings. Just a whisper through a mailed threat. I turned the paper over again and again. Was it a bluff? Or a warning? The next morning, I asked Julian to have the company's cybersecurity team investigate. If it came through the mail, he said, we can track the postmark but not much more. If it came from inside, I'll find it. That same afternoon, I received another call from Mr. Hargrove. You might want to sit down, he said. I was already seated. Still, his voice made my chest tighten. Jacob's legal team contacted us. He wants immunity in exchange for cooperation. Cooperation. He's willing to testify. Against Brielle. Yes. And against himself. He's offering to provide access to email records, offshore accounts, and internal communications about the Meridian deal. He wants protection. I stared at the floor. Jacob, who once seemed like a quiet shadow behind Brielle's ambition, was now ready to switch sides. To survive. Why now? I asked. Because he's been subpoenaed, Hargrove replied. The state's investigating the financial irregularities. And Jacob is afraid. How soon can we meet? Tomorrow morning. Private location. When I ended the call, I sat still in my father's chair. So many years I had been locked out of this world. Denied a voice. And now I was at the center of the storm. The people who once saw me as an afterthought were either aligning behind me, or running scared. But Brielle hadn't made her final move. And neither had I. The next morning broke cold and colorless. The kind of sky that held no emotion, no sign of light or storm, just a pale sheet pulled over the city. I stood outside a private law office in Beacon Hill, fingers curled tightly around the leather strap of my bag. Inside, Jacob Langston waited, Brielle's husband, former consultant, and now key witness to the entire financial scandal unraveling beneath Parker Developments. His message through Hargrove had been simple. Talk. But not in court. Not yet. When the receptionist escorted me into the glass conference room, I found Jacob already seated at the far end of the table, hunched forward, a legal pad in front of him and two lawyers at either side. He looked smaller. Gone was the sharp navy suit. The confident gaze. In its place, a pale man with circles under his eyes. Hands clasped tight like they were holding him together. Evelyn, he said as I entered. Not a greeting. More like a weary acknowledgement. Jacob. Mr. Hargrove sat beside me. So did Megan Cho, our corporate attorney. The tension was a living thing. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Megan said calmly. I want it on record, Jacob said, voice rough, that I was never the architect of this. Brielle and Colin started the conversations. I just helped move things. Moved what? I asked flatly. He exhaled through his nose. Money. Documents. Influence. You name it. Colin offered her a seat on the board at Meridian after the buyout. She was going to take Parker Developments, strip the history, sell the legacy properties, and let the rest rot quietly under shell LLCs. Make it disappear. Become a face on a different brand. Clenched my jaw. And you? I was supposed to handle logistics. I got a cut of every closed side deal. How long? He paused. Almost 4 years. First it was just a few shadow contracts. Things we could justify. Then it got deeper. Megan spoke up. You understand the risk you're taking. Yes, Jacob said. But if I go down, so does she. And Colin. He slid a flash drive across the table. Emails. Spreadsheets. Backdoor access. Everything you need to follow the money. I stared at it. It was so small. And yet, it held the weight of betrayal, greed, and nearly a decade of erosion. Why now? I asked. He gave a bitter smile. Because she's planning to burn it all down. If she can't win, she'll make sure you inherit nothing but rubble. Mr. Hargrove leaned forward. What do you mean by that? She's been siphoning funds from dormant accounts. Yesterday she filed a series of authorizations using old executive clearance codes. Ones only the CEO should have had access to. Froze. Those codes were deactivated after the board vote, Megan said. She had them backed up, probably on one of her secure drives. Walter had warned me this could happen. Now the sabotage wasn't speculation. It was real. What else? I asked. Jacob looked up. She's going to leak the audit. What audit? Megan narrowed her eyes. The internal one from last year, before your father started suspecting her. She had Walter's earlier draft, the one with speculative errors and missing explanations. Paints a picture of dysfunction. And she's planning to release it to the press with a timeline that suggests you were already influencing the company before the will was amended. I sat in stunned silence. Brielle wasn't just trying to contest the will. She was trying to destroy the reputation of the company. And of me. Why would she do that? Megan asked sharply. Because she thinks she can walk away and rebuild somewhere else. If she ruins you, she walks clean with her narrative intact. I stood suddenly, pushing back from the table. My whole body was cold. Send the drive to our forensic team, I told Megan. Get Walter on the phone. I want a lock on every old system and executive access point, even the ones archived. I want digital control today. We're already on it, she said, eyes sharp with focus. Jacob stood too. I know I don't deserve anything, Evelyn. But I'm trying to get ahead of what's coming. I looked at him for a long time. You could have stopped this years ago. I know, he said. But I was in love. Or maybe just afraid. Does she know you're here? He shook his head. She will. And she did. That evening, as I returned to the estate, Martha met me in the entry hall holding an envelope. This one had handwriting I knew too well. Brielle. Inside one line. You think you've won. But I still know how to make you disappear. My fingers tightened around the paper. The words didn't scare me. They infuriated me. I marched up the stairs, past the childhood room I had once curled into like a ghost, and into my father's study. I opened the cabinet, pulled the old files one by one. The contingency plans, the succession notes, the proof. And then I made a decision. Called Walter. Schedule a press conference, I said. Evelyn. No more silence. No more waiting. She's coming for the company with fire. I'm going to meet her in the open. The next morning, in front of cameras, press, and stockholders, I stood behind a podium in the Parker Tower. And I told the truth. The press conference was held in the grand atrium of Parker Tower. Sunlight poured through the high glass ceiling, casting long golden rays across the marble floor. Reporters, shareholders, employees, and curious onlookers filled the space with a tense hum. The podium had been polished to a shine, the Parker Developments emblem gleaming behind me on the projection screen. As I stood before them, my heart pounded, not from fear but from something else. Clarity. Thank you all for being here, I began, voice steady, firm. I stand before you not just as the new CEO of Parker Developments, but as the heir to a legacy that was almost lost, not through chance or misfortune, but through deception. Cameras clicked. Murmurs stirred. In the past few weeks, we've confirmed a number of financial irregularities and unauthorized activities committed under the previous executive leadership. Through internal audits, documentation recovered from my late father, and the cooperation of key witnesses, we've identified a network of illegal asset transfers, shell company contracts, and deals that violated both corporate policy and the ethical standards on which this company was founded. I paused, letting the gravity of my words sink in. The individuals responsible for these actions will be held accountable through all legal channels available to us. Criminal referrals have already been made. We are also initiating a complete restructuring of our compliance systems, with outside oversight. Reporters' hands shot up, but I held mine to signal I wasn't finished. But this story is not just about betrayal. It's about resilience. I looked up at the mezzanine, where several employees watched silently. It's about the legacy of Jonathan Parker, who believed that leadership should be earned, not inherited. That a name means nothing without the integrity to honor it. My father came to see that, even if it was near the end. And today I stand here to finish what he started, to rebuild what matters, to protect what's left, and to create something better. I exhaled slowly. We're not just going to survive this. We're going to emerge stronger. The room was silent. Then it erupted in applause. Not polite, not tentative, but real. Cathartic. The sound of release, of belief returning to a room that had carried too many lies for too long. Afterward, I stepped off stage and was immediately surrounded by board members, executives, and a few former skeptics now eager to align with the tide shift. But I kept walking, nodding politely, until I reached the edge of the crowd and saw Martha. She waited by the exit, hands clasped, eyes damp with emotion. "Your grandfather would have been proud," she said. "So would you," I replied softly, "if you knew how much your presence meant in that house all those years." She smiled gently, then reached into her coat pocket. "There's something else. Your father wrote it. I found it last night, wedged inside an old ledger in the attic. It was a single page. Note. Handwritten. Evelyn, if you're reading this, then you've taken the mantle. I imagine it wasn't easy. And if you're anything like your mother, you're still doubting yourself even now. I want you to stop. You always had the fire. I was just too blind to see it. And I let my fear of disrupting the order push you away. I regret that more than anything. Lead with truth. Listen more than I did. And never mistake silence for strength. I love you and I believe in you. But I folded the paper, heart burning. In the following weeks, the company shifted on its axis. Brielle's legal challenge collapsed under the weight of evidence and Jacob's sworn testimony. The investigation expanded beyond Parker Developments to include Meridian Holdings, forcing Colin Radley to step down amid scandal. Several key managers were removed quietly. The stock stabilized. Investor confidence began to return. But perhaps the most surprising shift came from Brielle herself. One rainy evening, she appeared at the estate. No entourage, no lawyers, just her. I opened the door, unsure whether to speak. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just wanted to see it one more time." We stood in the foyer, the portrait of our parents looming above. For a long while she said nothing. Then she turned to me. "You were always better than me," she whispered. I didn't answer. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small box and handed it to me. Inside was our mother's locket. "She would have wanted you to have it," she said. And then, without another word, she left. I stood there for a long time, fingers curled around the delicate gold. In the months that followed, Parker Developments transformed. Not just structurally but philosophically. We launched the Jonathan Parker Foundation, dedicated to supporting ethical innovation in real estate and technology. I returned to Seattle once a month to stay close to the team I had built there, but my heart was now rooted in Boston, in the city that once shut me out and now looked to me for direction. Employees began referring to the transition not as a scandal, but as a reckoning, a necessary reckoning. And sometimes when I walked past the study at the estate, my father's old room now my own, I'd pause and whisper, "See it now. All of it." And I did. Not just the damage, but the chance to rebuild, to lead, to become the heir not by name, but by purpose. And in the end, that was the inheritance that mattered most.